bit, not necessarily mine, but something on the mouse was kind of moving around, so just have to work with me. So as Carolyn said, my name is James Hannig. I'm a fourth-year urban planning grad student. I like to think of myself. And I'm really honored to be here today and sharing my thesis topic with all of you, which is the perceptions of bike sharing in underserved communities in Milwaukee and the Twin Cities. All right, work. Okay, hopefully it doesn't keep going. So my entry point into the topic is my background as a civil engineer, transportation engineer, in which I've worked on a lot of environmental documents and looked into environmental justice evaluations and analyses. And with that, by environmental justice, I mean how minority and low-income populations are often disproportionately impacted by the built environment. So a year ago, when I was exploring various topics, because I knew I wanted to do a thesis, and I was taking Professor Schneider's class, which is the bicycle and pedestrian planning class, and I knew I wanted to do something related to biking and equity, and a number of topics were emerging. Oh, I had stuff progressing there.
You probably have it's a timer.
Is it?
Probably in your PDF there's time.
I don't know. Well, we'll see. If it keeps going, I might just have to back up.
We can just turn it off.
Do you know where that is? Because I didn't originally have one set up.
Transitions.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's going after. Take that off.
Oh, okay. All right. There we go. Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
Okay. Must have been something when we were setting it up. Okay. We'll get there eventually.
Okay. I'll use a keyboard.
Okay. So as I was saying, a number of documentations were coming out on bike sharing equity, or bike and equity, from the League of American Bicyclists, and even more recently, People for Bikes and Transportation Research Board. And around the same time, it had been announced that bike sharing was coming to Milwaukee, and I was really excited about it. I've used it, it's great. But I also couldn't help but notice that it seemed like it was mostly located in downtown station locations. And even to a degree, it seemed like maybe it was being marketed potentially to particular demographics. And so I really wanted to explore, around the country how it had been implemented and what it was looking like. So with that, I developed kind of a two-pronged research question, that being, how do underserved communities actually perceive bike sharing? And are there other models that could potentially serve their transportation needs a little better? Oh, I want to preface that I'm not trying to call out any planners or bike share operators as being inequitable, but just more acknowledging that as practitioners, I feel, let's do it again, that we're obligated to really make sure that we're looking at the needs of the community, especially if federal and state dollars are potentially involved. So I targeted two metro areas, that being the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota, and Milwaukee. I chose Milwaukee partially because of proximity that I'm here, but also because as it hadn't been implemented yet, bike sharing, I thought perceptions could potentially be pretty fresh or maybe even non-existent. I picked the Twin Cities also partially for proximity reasons, but also they were one of the first bike share systems after Washington, D.C., and they were called out of the gate relatively early for potentially not being quite as equitable. And so they've had a number of initiatives to try to address that. So I developed an approach after reviewing the current literature and talking to a number of advocates and planners in the field. And I talked with bike share operators and kind of got a sense of how they're approaching the topic of equity and who they talk with. And many of them recommended that I actually talk with their various partners, community partners, different social service providers, community organizations, other advocates, And I wanted to hold focus groups with actual community members to hear their thoughts. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to get to that just sort of for time constraints and limited resources personally. So after talking with these community partners in both metro areas, a number of themes emerged centered around questions of what sort of value to the individual does bike sharing bring, and the importance of relationships in the conversation, and how real or not real some of the barriers are, like access to credit cards or bank accounts, or even some social and cultural norms. And then we really would talk a little bit about these other models that exist, and some of the perceptions that I heard as far as biking goes is, well, biking is just sort of a youth activity. Adults don't really think of it much. Or bike share specifically perceptions where it seems like it was for white hipsters. And in the Twin Cities, where bike share stations had been located in low-income areas or underserved areas, people thought it was interesting, but they didn't know how to approach it and how to use it. A number of the community partners also, interviewees, mentioned that they feel that practitioners are making a lot of assumptions without actually engaging the communities, saying that people won't use bike share or don't want bike share, or they don't really see benefits in biking. But many of them said that's just wrong, those assumptions are wrong. One example that was raised was the Milwaukee Public Library Express, which has a mobile library that's located off of Silver Spring. And they said, you'll be surprised at the resources people will take advantage of when they're made available to them. Almost across the board, everyone stressed that having the relationships are key, and engaging the communities early and really building the trust with them is really important. And then to rely on the relationships that they already have with these other community partners and these intermediaries, and including the communities in identifying barriers and even involving them in coming up with creative ways to mitigate the barriers. Then I also explored these other models. Kind of the highlight was, or not the highlight, but one that is well documented, was sort of this long-term loan program that Nice Ride Minnesota, the bike share operator in the Twin Cities, had a pilot project last summer where they worked with these community partners to give out a number of loan bicycles and required them to attend trainings, and they got a helmet. And later this winter, they released a study that showed that after participating in this program, a number of participants said that they were much more comfortable and interested in participating in bike share. I also heard a lot of feedback on partnering with housing authorities and as being specific populations that have needs that could be, transportation needs that could be met by bike sharing. And lastly, a few individuals suggested you should put bike share stations in parks, which really opened up the idea of biking as recreation, using bike share as recreation as opposed to as transportation. So I've identified a few key opportunities I feel that as practitioners we could potentially explore a little further, and we'll have in my final thesis report a little more on this. But focusing on the relationship building aspect of it, as I said, engaging the communities early, and having the hard conversations when topics of racism or other needs in the community raise, to really listen and find other ways to address that conversation or get the right people involved. Really exploring this concept of bike sharing as recreation, as an entry point, as opposed to connecting to transit or as a commute mode. And then lastly, just always including families and community events in bike sharing and just the way we approach it, including group rides, involving the youth, and acknowledging that there are various levels of ability and finding ways to make bike sharing fit that. I think I skipped over, but the last one is, probably have time for a couple questions.
guys have any questions?
James, I've heard of other long-term bike loans
Yes.
programs, so it's neat to see that Nice Ride is also exploring this other model of kind of a long-term
Yeah.
loan. So would you say that was like one of the best examples, or were there others that might even be more effective for long-term community partnerships?
Yeah, I couldn't find a lot of documentation, or at least online, with that. I know Cycles for Change in the Twin Cities has like a Earn a Bike program, and maybe other programs too. But a lot of the people I talked with were specifically mentioned that they don't consider it bike sharing, and really wanted to separate the two. But looking at it as a possible entry point to bike sharing. So to answer your question directly though, that seemed to me to be one of the best documented ones, at least that Nice Ride was able to share with me. But I also saw something in, I think it was Buenos Aires, but it's all in Spanish. Yeah, Spanish. So it was kind of limited in what I could take from it, but where they had like a longer term loan. But I think it's a growing interest, and there might be more out there that I'm missing. It's hard to keep up. It's really, the whole conversation is just sort of like enveloped around me.
Any other questions, comments?
Bob?
I was just wondering if you could say something about the cost of of a ride in the typical design of the system. How's that set up for Bublr bikes, for example, and how could that be a potential barrier to people of limited means?
I have to admit I can't remember what the current price after the change, but I know that I recently stumbled across a study that Temple University did, where participants in these 6 focus groups said that making it competitive or even less than transit was a real attractive element of making sure that it's priced so that people in sort of underserved or low-income areas can actually access it, and that it's competitive for their trips they want to take it for. So it's a huge consideration, and I'm in the process yet of still, tying everything together, but that's definitely a real barrier that we definitely need to look at.
And it's related to the profitability. It's not profitability, but the
the revenue stream,
sustainability
right,
of the system for the
yeah, yep,
So I think they're trying not to have it always be subsidized.
Right.
Which is what it could be.
and especially there are certain density requirements that a lot of times. But anyway, I don't want to hold up.
I'm most excited about the recreation opportunity, because when you do a lot of work in the central city, the whole health discussion comes
Yep.
up. And so there's opportunity for more studies where you could actually do a joint study with public health and look at that benefit, because that health has a lot of money out there in terms of access to funding. So that combination, because I think we always hear about it for transportation, but the recreation is actually interesting as well. Okay, thanks.
Awesome,
Amy.
thank you, appreciate it.
So we have another presentation on Bublr.
So Aida, sorry, I can't pronounce your last name very well, and 2 students from the civil engineering department worked on this data analysis for Bublr bikes. Is it gonna let me?
Just use the arrow.
All right. So quick background. In 2013, they started with one station at Discovery World, which is this one right here. And then in 2014, they expanded to 10 stations, just kind of around downtown and the surrounding area. And if you look really closely at this map, there's actually 11 stations on it, because they have already added Brady Street this year. So to compare Milwaukee's system to a couple other cities, these top 3, New York, Chicago, and Washington, D.C., are kind of the big leagues with 300 or more stations each. And then Minneapolis and Madison are a little more comparable to Milwaukee. So currently Milwaukee is way behind, but the last planned statistics I heard were that they were going to put in about 100 stations, so that would put us more in the middle of the pack. Not the head of the pack, but middle's not too bad. All right, so we started out with the broad view of looking at the trips by month. So the yellow is 2013. It technically started in June, but it really got going in July. and then gradually decreased throughout the season. And then in 2014, started much earlier in April, and then that transition area in August is when they started adding more stations. So it really increased dramatically. Looking at the trips by day of the week, there's a very distinct pattern with not as many trips on Wednesdays and lots of trips on the weekends. And in fact, just Saturday and Sunday make up about 40% of all trips taken on Bublr. If you divide that same data up between the trips taken by Milwaukee County residents and non-residents, you can really see that the blue, the Milwaukee County residents, is actually pretty steady all through the week, whereas the red, the non-residents, varies significantly. And this probably suggests that the non-residents are traveling in on the weekends and using the bikes recreationally as they're visiting, while the Milwaukee County residents are probably doing a mix of the two. This is another division of the same data. The green is the monthly or yearly pass users, and the purple is the people who bought a daily pass at a kiosk. So that's an even more dramatic division, with the green being people who are probably using it during the workday, maybe to get to work, maybe to go to lunch, and the purple are people who are using it primarily for recreation. Then this is the checkout time of trips by time of day. There has never been a Bublr bike checked out between midnight and 4 a.m. Not popular in the middle of the night, apparently. The purple here is Saturday. You can see it has the highest use kind of in the middle of the day. The red is Sunday. We get peaks around about 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock. And then the third highest peak is the blue and Friday lunch hour. Apparently, Bublr bikes are very popular then. And then this is the same data divided into weekdays and weekends. So on the weekends, there's kind of a smooth curve peaking in about the mid-afternoon, whereas on the weekdays, there's a kind of morning commute / breakfast, a lunchtime, and an evening commute / dinner peak. All right, this is trip duration. So overall, surprising number of trips, less than 5 minutes. And then there's actually a really interesting wave pattern with each of these humps being just a little bit before the 30-minute mark, because at the time the pricing system charged more every 30 minutes, which it's been adjusted, but I think that's still the case, that it's in 30-minute increments. And then this is the data divided again between Milwaukee County residents and non-residents. And you can really see that the non-residents are more likely to have longer trips, whereas the residents peak again at the less than 5. The non-residents actually peak at the 6 to 10 minute mark, and later in this about 45 to 60 minute zone have significantly more trips than the residents. This is the number of trips by station, and it's only September to December of last year, because that was the only time that all 10 stations were in action at the same moment. Discovery World and Public Market are leading the pack. 411 East Wisconsin and Wisconsin Center are kind of towards the end, but there's not such a dramatic change that we would advocate moving those stations somewhere else. Now, rebalancing needs to be done in a bike share system. If a station empties out, then bikes need to be brought to that station. So that's represented on this graph. So Cathedral Square and the US Bike Center are the stations most likely to get empty or near empty and need replacement. The flip side of that is that these are the stations that tend to fill up and need bikes taken from them. So Red Arrow Park, US Bank Center, and kind of the intermodal station are the ones most likely to fill up and need bikes taken away from them for balancing purposes. All right, then we have some travel pattern maps. So this is your one look at the legend, because all the others I made larger so that you could really see what was going on. This is the weekday travel patterns, and it's fairly evenly distributed. And then if we divide up the day, in the morning up until about 10:30 a.m., it's still fairly evenly distributed, but you can definitely see a lot of trips coming from here. This is the intermodal station, and the purple there is Cathedral Square. During the lunchtime, kind of midday period, it's again fairly evenly spread out. possibly because people are doing various errands and going to lunch all over the area. The green, I believe, is water in Wisconsin. And then in the evening, you can see a little bit more of a shift towards the edges here. People might be traveling home at that point. The weekend actually looks very different. This is all of the travel on the weekend put together, and it's very heavily concentrated in the eastern portion of the network. Weekend mornings, kind of sparse, not very many people up around then. Weekend afternoons are the strongest, and there's a particularly strong link between public market and Discovery World. Personal theory of mine was that people might be getting off the bus lines at the public market and using the bike share system to travel to the lakefront for just having fun. And then here's the evening. Again, a little less, still some focus on Discovery World there. All right, and some maps. So out of all of those trips, 40% of them were taken by users from outside Wisconsin. So there's definitely a very high tourist use in this bike share system. So this is just the trips taken in Wisconsin. Obviously, they kind of concentrate around Milwaukee, but we get people coming in from all over. We tried to make we tried to make a US map, but it just was too difficult to see. Here's a close-up. So there's all our Bublr stations in the center. And we were actually a little bit surprised. We expected the highest use to all be concentrated immediately around the Bublr area, but it is spread out. There's a definite pattern both along the lakefront and out west towards Wauwatosa. And then for comparison from Bob Schneider's class, this is the Milwaukee County Bike Commute Mode Share. So you can see some similarities in where the densest regions of bike use are. And then this is just for emphasis, this is the zip codes of the highest users. And again, they are not all concentrated around where the actual system is. The highest users are coming from a much larger portion of the area. So again, possibly workers coming in and using it regularly during the week. And, just closer view of that. And then finally, our last slide, we tried to pull some recommendations from all of this data that we went over. We recommend that in addition to transit stations and other attractors that are traditionally considered, that Bublr look at tourist attractions in hotels when siting future stations, since there does seem to be such high tourist use. And they can also probably expect lower per station revenue as they expand, because many other systems have seen the same thing. There's usually more profit, quote unquote, made with the people who buy day passes, whereas as you expand, you're more likely to see fewer people using day passes and more people using the monthly and yearly passes. So the per station revenue will probably drop. And another factor would be balancing between placing stations in those dark areas with high bicycle use with the equity component of making sure that they are available to everyone evenly. We could also use travel patterns to predict their rebalancing needs to make that a little bit easier on them. And finally, some future things could be conducting user surveys or GPS sampling. And finally, we recommend that they roll out their new stations this year quickly to take advantage of that high summer activity rather than waiting until later in the summer and only catching the tail end of it. Whew. All right, any questions?
Questions or comments?
Yeah.
In terms of the residents versus non-residents, how are you enjoying that data? Is it from?
How did we do it?
Yeah, how are you pulling where people are from?
Zip codes. When people use their card to pay, there's a zip code attached to it.
Yeah. So.
Well, it's better than the phone, because so many students still have a phone that's from out of state, even though they're living here now.
How can you tell direction sort of between stations? Was that in the data?
Yeah, every trip has where it's coming from
Oh,
and
okay.
when and where it's going to.
Okay.
How many of them were returned to the same station?
Oh yes, I forgot to mention that.
Yeah.
Those maps only show the trips between stations. There were also trips that left and originated and returned to the same station. And I don't recall the percentage, but it was fairly high, maybe about 30%.
Yeah, surprisingly high, given
Yeah.
the system is designed to go from place to place.
But I think if you
But they
look at
use short
tourists,
range.
I think it's discovering world in the public market, you're gonna leave there and come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just because you wanna have fun, try to have it. That's what I do with my kids.
Yeah.
Do you, I just thought it was cool to see the Cathedral Square. Do you have any ideas why that is out faster than others?
It might be because it's on the edge of the network, and there may be more people coming from that northeast portion, picking up a bike there and continuing on the rest of the way to the network.
Or it's uphill.
Say again?
Or it's uphill.
Or it's uphill. Yeah.
Those bike stations are all pretty close to where they're talking about putting the streetcar. Did you find any possible correlation?
You know, I don't
With its
know.
use with the streetcar?
I know that bike share systems do typically start in the downtown area because of the density. So it could be just that the light rail is starting in downtown for the same reasons, to take advantage of that density. As far as I know, there's not been any coordination with the station locations and where the light rail is going to go.
I know they pick locations, they looked at like where people will be going destination and the density of where a lot of people are working. Did they map or do you have access to where all the restaurants and bars are?
I did not.
Because there's more restaurants and cafes. I mean, it'd be interesting to map that out because that could determine other clusters of where you want to go. Wow, this is really useful. It's also new, so it's going to be, I mean, that's only Milwaukee too. Shorewood's getting some. I was at a meeting recently about Toast's. They're getting 20, I guess. Yeah. Okay. There. Okay, we're going to shift away from bikes and we're going to talk a little bit more about farming and
community
urban
food
aid,
systems,
right?
yeah.
Community food systems. We have David Johnson. He's going to talk about his Cream City Farms project.
Okay, so my presentation is in two parts. So I'm going to talk, first I'm going to kind of do a brief flyover of the independent study track that I've taken to learn about how to design and improve community food systems. And then part two will be about Cream City Farms and the efforts that are going on there to activate a dead industrial site in the third district court. For my independent study track, I basically gave up any thought of ever doing any electives outside of community food system oriented stuff. So I've done two internships, one with the Guetschow in Milwaukee, where I was able to wrap in work I was already doing at Cream City Gardens. And then currently this semester I am with the Institute for Urban Agriculture and Nutrition, serving as their food systems intern. And that's actually going to turn into a part-time job when I graduate. And in the independent study track that I've taken, there are three questions that I felt that I should, or two things that I really should know about. So one, how do you define a food system? And then the tricky part, I had no idea what I was getting into, which is how do you conduct an assessment of a food system? And then this semester, my independent study is actually is doing an assessment of UWM's food system, kind of treating UWM as a small town and learning as much as I can about how we feed the people on campus. So I've talked about Cream City Gardens a little bit before, so I'll just kind of blow through this pretty quickly, but I learned a lot about zoning and permitting. Milwaukee is a very friendly town to urban agriculture and community gardens. Very easy to start a community garden. You don't need an occupancy permit, you just need the approval of the alderman. Where it got a little tricky early on in 2011, Cream City Gardens sits on city land as well as privately held land. And so we wanted to sell some of the produce that we were growing in order to support the project. You can't do that for where we were growing in city land, it's prohibited. And for the privately held land, we would need to get a license to do that. And trying to navigate that process through the city, it just couldn't get done. It just wasn't designed to happen. Now, fortunately, in fall of 2014, the city revamped all of those codes and has made it much easier for folks operating out of community gardens to sell the produce. And you can now sell produce that's also produced on city-owned land. One of the hopes for the project is that we could help kind of launch some urban renewal in the King Park neighborhood. And it's been a terrific way to engage the community. Every single time I was out in the gardens, somebody would come by and ask me questions about it. And I love seeing little kids come through and look at these bright, glowing vegetables, and you can tell they wanted to eat it. No idea if it's sweet or not, but they wanted to eat it because they just look so good. So one of the things, so this is the King Park neighborhood here, Highland, 17th Street, Valete Street, and 12th Street. And this is a residential neighborhood, but if you notice, there aren't that many houses. There's a block here with 2 houses on it. Here's a block with 2 houses. Here's one with 3. It's just, I've never seen an area so empty like that. And a lot of these empty plots are owned by the King Park Development Group. I don't know what they're waiting for, but my guess is something will happen soon with all the development that's happening over in the brewery area. And now with the arena probably going up in Old Park East corridor, I think they're probably thinking the time is right. Hopefully they're thinking the time is right to do something. So our garden project is in this part here. And when we originally started the project for Cream City Gardens, the goal was to do a full-fledged aquaponics facility. I've actually got drawings for that, NJ, now a PhD in architecture. He took his classes through doing those designs for us. And so just a little bit about the history and how it transitioned. So this is the original plot here. There were 2 houses right here, owned by the guest house, that were empty and falling apart. They were accumulating a lot of violations on them, racking up a lot of fines. They've been working very hard to try and get money to bring them down, and it just wasn't happening. The guest house is located right here, and then the other partner is Freedom's Community Ministries, which operates a food pantry in the Human Services building up here. So we decided, instead of waiting until we can get the money to build the aquaponics facility, let's start growing right away. So we put in 5 raised beds here. Someone saw us doing that, said, I'll help you raise money. So they raised $6,000, and we were able to start filling in raised beds down on the corner here. Then someone approached the Greater Milwaukee Foundation and said, hey, here's money for the guest house to bring these houses down so they can expand the garden. So it was really an interesting way to see how this land got activated. So this is what the operation was last year, a full-fledged acre. So we've got row here, where you see rows, that's privately held land. Where you see the raised beds, that's city-owned land because that's what's required. We have to bring in soil to do that. And then, end of last year, we were able to, got money from the Brewers Community Foundation to build a rainwater pavilion to collect rainwater for the garden. And then this past year, or just a week ago, we were nominated for a Mandy Award for that project. The Trailblazer Award, we didn't win that, but we did get the People's Choice. So that's the update on Cream City Gardens. And then for my urban ag project, or for my internship with IUAN, I'm working on a curriculum inventory, trying to find about the food system related coursework for the member institutions. I've helped develop an internship program working with undergraduate minority students in the STEM Inspire program. They'll be working in the compost operation this summer here at UWM. And then we're also launching a tech transfer program with Vincent High School to help them revise their composting program and long-term help them rediscover their mission as an agricultural-related school. So for the independent study track, the first thing that I tackled was what's in a food system. brought some of the books that I use for that. Highly recommend all of these. Planner's Guide is my Bible moving forward. And then Hungry City, this needs to be part of 720. Because it was really eye-opening how our food system shapes the city. They were built, original cities were built along those trade lines that were bringing food into the city. And then this was really eye-opening as well, Omnivore's Dilemma. My favorite part of that is the last meal, which is totally self-sufficient, where he killed the pig, grew the vegetables, foraged for mushrooms, and made bread based from yeast that he collected from his windowsill, just blowing it off the thing. And so the key learnings from that independent study track is that the food system is made up of 3 basic sets of building blocks. One would be the components, which is what most of how you see food systems usually defined, by production, processing, distribution, consumption, and resource recovery. And then from my own insights, there's also the elements that are involved. Food systems are about people, plants, and animals. It's about the water, it's about the earth, and it's about light. And light being, why would this be important for planners? If you just look at the struggles that Sweetwater Organics had in their site where they tried to activate that industrial building, they failed. They failed to bring in light, sufficient light. First thing I would have done was punch holes in the roof, get those skylights in, so you've got natural light and you're less dependent on trying to do artificial light. And then the third building block is the food shed itself, which is that geographic area where food is sourced. And as I learned in the Hungry City, cities were once yoked to their local food shed. It limited the size, how large they could be. And then they were freed from that with the advent of the railroad. Although when you look at Rome, they relied on a global food system to feed their cities as well. So you can go back in the ancient times. You'll often see food sheds kind of designed as global, national, and local. And in the research that I looked through, it was common to choose either 50 or 100-mile radius for the local food shed. And basically, with my experience, I would argue that you should define the local food shed at a municipal boundary, and in particular counties. The second independent study track that I did, which was last fall, was how do you conduct a food system assessment? And after 6 months, my head was still kind of spinning on that, and I'm actually still working on that paper. And so these were the primary resources that I worked with. So the assessment tools pretty much had this same basic organizational pattern. Send an assessment team, clarify your goals, create a budget, gather data, publish your results. And I think the really important piece that it seems that a lot of communities fail to do is they think when they've done the assessment, they now have their plan. And you need to move into you need to create a plan from the assessment. I was really impressed by what Philadelphia did with their food system assessment and then converting that into a food system plan. So the things that a food assessment, and this is actually part of my frustration because these are more my questions and I did not see a lot of these questions addressed by food assessments. So how much food is needed to feed the community? The assessments that I looked through weren't really asking that question. Philadelphia asked it, but then they just kind of glossed over it. They quickly transitioned to, well, can we produce that much food from our local food shed for 2 million people? And then they said, well, we got 2 million people, and then they gave up on it and moved on. But what's the demand for food in the community? What are people actually eating? What's the nutrition requirements for your population? Where's the food coming from? What's the capacity of the local food, the food shed to meet the need and the demand, or the demand? How well is the system allocating food? And this is where where assessments really tend to focus on. Who's having trouble accessing food and why? And how well does the system return nutrients to the earth? This is what assessments typically are not asking. So I reviewed these assessments. I was going to look at more, but once I actually got into them in detail, they kind of fell short on the assessments. But I have looked at a few more as a result of my APW project. So the primary focus of food assessments are really on food insecurity, access, urban agriculture, and trying to promote buying local. And then I've talked about this already, where I felt the assessments kind of fall short. And then the key findings from this for me have been, it's a complex system, and when trying to assess it, you really need to have a large time horizon, and you should probably, I feel that it's best to approach it one component at a time. So look at the production piece, then look at the processing, then look at distribution, and that this needs to be built into a cycle. Philadelphia did a nice job of creating indicators with their initial assessment, so that they could now then return to just these indicators on an annual basis to see how well the food system is functioning. And definitely, you have to understand who you're feeding and how much food you need for them. And then set expectations regarding the quality of the diet and the ease of access. One of the big insights for me when I started the process was that, we grow, I've never heard anybody say this, but I think there's an understanding when you grow up in America that it's unacceptable for somebody to die from hunger. We will go out of our way to make sure that that never happens on our streets. But then when that's all we tend to ask of our food system, and we need to ask more. We need to demand that we get a healthy diet and that everybody has access to that healthy diet. And then I'm currently working on the food system assessment here for UWM. We're trying to measure the amount of food moving through UWM, seen through the lens of a balanced and healthy diet. And for the most part, I'm trying to, so I've looked at the UWM population, figured out how much fruits, vegetables, grains, protein, and dairy that's needed to meet the nutritional requirements of the population. And I'm going to follow that all the way through to the cycle, to the point where are we recovering the resources? So the food waste, is it coming back as compost? So it's great that UWM has a compost operation. And then I'm also, this was my favorite piece of this project so far, I got to send an email to MMSD to say how much crap is UWM producing. Because it's great that MMSD converts waste into mulorganite, which is nutrients to grow food. And then the question is, does that match the amount of food that we actually, will this grow the amount of food that's actually needed for the population? So that's the independent study track.
You're,
A little over.
yeah.
Okay.
We can just wrap it up.
Yeah, so just, I think the key thing for Cream City Farms here is this one here. So to get, so as we're trying to activate this location, this is the money that's involved. So $200,000 to clean up the site, and that's coming from EPA. $150,000 from MMSD to install a cistern for stormwater management and irrigation of the farm. $15,000 from Strong Neighborhoods Fund to install a nice fence. And then I've also got a partnership with Washington Park Partners, $7,000 that hires me to be a farm in residence for the neighborhood, and working with the community gardens that are in the neighborhood, as well as working with interns that they'll supply to me, who will help manage the gardens as well as participate in my business operations. And then yeah, I've got a SketchUp model of the site, but I'm out of time. So.
It's fascinating. Questions or comments from you guys? I have a general question. Do you track at all how through the guest house or some of the others it impacts people in terms of jobs and socially? Because it's not just the health aspect, there's a much broader
Yeah.
impact on their or is that not, it's a separate study?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think they're tracking it to some degree and maybe a little bit more. But just from my experience, because I'm with that project as a volunteer, but I work closely with the guys. One of the things that was really cool was the guys reconnecting with, their own history. So a lot of the guys that would come through, especially the ones who want to be a regular part of it, because we have a training program that goes with the guest house. These guys were recalling, working with their grandmothers in the gardens. So some guys had history in that way. There was one gentleman who, I'll say it was seemed to be kind of slow. But he was there, and there was one day where it just seemed to click, and he would be out in the garden every day. And there's one, he said to me one day, and it's like, "Wow, I'm really tired." I was like, "Yeah, you've been working really hard in this garden." And I asked him, "Is that a good tired or a bad tired?" And he said, it's a good tired. And then not too long after that, he moved on into permanent housing. Most of the guys who come through the garden and are there on a regular basis tend to leave the guest house on good terms into their own permanent housing, into their own jobs. They weren't moving into urban ag positions like we had hoped, and that's part of why I started Green City Farm, so I can hire the guys from the training
Have
program.
an opportunity for them.
Yeah.
All right, that's good impact. All right, thank you. Okay, our final one is the Urban Land Institute team. It's Quartier Vert. I'll let them give the overall, but we have Jake, Joe, Ryan, Efrain, and then we had another student from UW-Madison for the real estate portion. How many of you have heard about this before? Okay, anybody in this building has ever heard about it? Okay. Are you going to do an overview or should I? Of what it is? So Urban Land Institute, there's a student competition every January. I've been an advisor on this for many years. So we were excited that this year they were finalists in the nation. So the process is 2 weeks in January. It has to include everything from planning, urban design, architecture, and real estate. So you have to have a full performer to show you're buying land, you're making money, it works. It's juried by 12 folks through Urban Land Institute. And out of 120 submittals, these guys were one of 4 teams that made finalists. So they were up against 2 teams from Harvard and 1 from the University of Maryland. And you bring in your final and you get to revise it. They presented down in New Orleans, did a great job. So it's been kind of an exciting process for our school, but for them, and exhausting.
Yeah, finally catching back up on the practice.
Oh, just.
Well, Karen, let's say half the things I was going to say. So,
Oh,
you say it. So this is one of our images from our final boards. Quartier Vert. I still don't know if you pronounce it correctly or not.
Yeah, where's your signature? I didn't do any of that.
This is the original entry board that we submitted back in January. At that point, once we submitted and were selected, the jury gave us some feedback on a few things we liked, or a few things they liked, or some things they had some concerns about that we could further address in our next stage. So this is the board we submitted for our finalist stage. A lot of our ideas stayed the same from our original entry, but then we just kind of be able to expand on them and go in more detail. So this is a site, if you guys aren't familiar with New Orleans, exactly, the Mississippi River runs right around here and loops around. This is the French Quarter, and this is where our site was located. This is Canal Street that runs up and down, there's a big trolley line on it. Our site directly though, we're working with Canal Street. There's a big interstate 10 that runs this way, and there's a large greenway here that used to be, it's a trade route between Lake Pontchartrain in the north and coming down into the French Quarter. This is now, it's got a very underutilized spot, and the greenway, they're trying to reactivate it. So those are some of the issues we were working with around the site. Also, they were building a giant hospital complex around Canal Street. So I guess we were trying to find the best way to develop this parcel of land over the course of a 10-year phasing period. If you look at our actual site, here's part of the hospital that I was talking about. And we were cutting underneath and trying to develop an area underneath the interstate, which is what you see here, but the interstate would run above this right here, and this is the large greenway that I was talking about, and it runs down the French Quarter down here, but that's Louis Armstrong Park. So it's all about making these connections back and forth and through the site. Yeah.
I think it's important too to point out that this area is it's a pretty low income neighborhood, and there, if you experience, we don't have any actual photos up of current conditions, but it's pretty run down and not a whole lot going on. So this hospital development that's happening kind of beyond in this perspective is really a big deal. It's introducing a lot of jobs and a lot of potential activity to the area. So this is our kind of our main corner coming in from downtown. This is Canal Street running this way, and Claiborne that runs along the underside of the freeway. So this really is kind of like an entry to the site if you're coming from downtown. And originally on our first proposal, we had a movie theater there because we were creating this entertainment district, and it was really kind of supposed to be an icon to that entertainment value. But that was one of the criticisms, not criticisms, but concerns risen from the jury, saying that maybe the movie theater wasn't the best location there. So we have this city Target that is taking influence from one in Seattle that you saw recently. And but it's this idea that a city Target, and most people like Targets for some reason, and I'm not sure why. I mean, I enjoy them, but people love Targets, and they do bring a lot of people to areas. And when we're starting this neighborhood and saying that we want to develop from this intersection or from this edge that we have with the hospital on the far side, how can we bring people into the site? So the Target serves that purpose. But then also, as an urban Target, there's kind of a sense of kind of convenience for residents in the area, and we're trying to build this neighborhood development. And that was one thing that the jury particularly liked about our original scheme, was the idea of having a very neighborhood-focused development. So the city Target, we thought, was a better way to do that and bring people to the area. But then we also had this need or suggestion, or I guess comment by the jury, that really this interstate freeway was a major barrier for the area, and how can we activate that more? So we developed a series of multi-use spaces going from Canal Street to the Greenway to connect people both ways, as well as bicyclists, and kind of activate each of these spaces, not only as a transition between the space, but also as extensions off the neighborhood that we're developing as well. So these are some sections showing kind of how dominant this freeway really is. And in designing these, we really wanted to bring a lot of kind of green. We call our scheme Quartier Vert, as Ryan will go into further detail on later. So we want to bring a lot of greenery into it, and even have kind of these fake yellow trees, glowing trees that create an arcade through the space, bringing people through, and having different uses off it. So we have recreational uses, food truck courts, just kind of random pop-out spaces for music or any kind of activity going on. And more of, as well as commuter paths for bicyclists and pedestrians in the area. And these are some of the perspectives we pulled from them, if you want to hit it again anyway. As a whole, this is kind of an aerial, and I'm not sure how well it reads for you guys, but our idea was that this freeway becomes a spine underneath here that connects people from this major regional grabbing greenway, pulls people in and back down towards our activity on Canal Street and into our neighborhoods. So these are the glowing trees going throughout there. And this is more of the recreational aspect that's connecting directly to this greenway. And their thoughts for this greenway is really to have regional connection, but also having these active spaces on it that can service the neighborhoods. And here's some additional spaces we have. We use old streetcars to create like coffee shops or impromptu performance spaces underneath our freeway, as well as numerous venues, kind of make your own space on the freeway for a music venue type of locations as well. And this adjacent at our kind of our second major intersection on the corridor, we have the one on Claiborne and Canal. This one is 2 streets up, and it's kind of what we thought is our intersection to our main backyard space, like backyard block, which I think Efrain's going to talk a little more about.
So the backyard block really was, you can go on to the next slide. A little different than what was in the existing surrounding area or of the amenities that we were introducing. It's kind of like this more intimate backyard space that we were introducing, where we would take existing houses, adapt them and reuse them, turn them into restaurants, bars, and pretty much just create this intimate space in this backyard for either the individuals that would live in the area or anybody in the surrounding area or any tourist, just to come in and kind of experience something different rather than what it typically is, where in New Orleans, typically it's on the streets, everything's kind of going on, and to kind of introduce this backyard experience was something different, where there'd be backyard patios, fire pits, and then so you can kind of get the sense of what we were going for as far as the experience, the lighting and kind of like the enclosed area. And so in this space, the section actually shows our water feature, which Ryan is going to talk about a little bit more about the sustainability within our site.
Yeah, so as we all know, New Orleans is obviously a city that has a lot of flood issues, and this is due greatly because of the lack of sustainable water and green infrastructure throughout the city. So Quartier Vert, our project, worked at 4 different scales of green infrastructure throughout. The regional scale, the neighborhood scale, the street scale, and shown here, the backyard scale. So what this specific water feature is showing is a series of cisterns that would collect rainwater from the surrounding roofs of the backyard block. It would fill them to a certain point where then they would finally discharge into a rainwater feature. This here is showing our more of our regional scale / neighborhood scale. So this here is part of the Fit Greenway, along with our housing projects along there. So what this is showing is rainwater runoff into cisterns, which then fill a water collection pond, which is irrigated on the Fit Greenway, creating a nice water feature for the residents that live along this space.
Okay. All right, so this is just a little bit over phasing, which is all the numbers and stuff. Is pretty much what all the stuff our real estate from Madison did, but we know a little bit about it. I know Joe mentioned we wanted to start our phasing off down by the hospital because that's something that's almost completed, and that's where a lot of the economic activity is happening right now. So our phasing really started from there, bringing in some more businesses, some things that cater to the hospital. But then our phasing started slowly moving its way over to the Greenway, where in our final stages where we introduced more of a residential, it's where we introduced more of a residential, and then, so I guess, yeah, we just started from one side and the phasing kind of moved over, with their backyard spaces in between. Just hoping for, of course, a 10-year period.
Yeah, like Jake was saying, is we wanted to start with more of like a retail density, building on the existing housing projects that are going up around the area before we brought in more residential density into the neighborhood. So.
Yeah, that's the gist.
Comments or questions from you guys? You have to sort of see the details of some of this, right?
Yeah.
Oh, James.
Who owns the land under the freeway? Is it like the state DOT?
City.
Yeah, city, yeah.
Narrow.
Currently it's parking lots, and then there's also a impound lot for the city. So.
It's two very, very busy streets on either side. When you're there in person, it's actually overwhelming.
Yeah. 2 lanes.
It was actually a traffic jam one of the days I was driving on it.
Yeah.
So there's the whole issue we talked about biking. Did you know?
Oh, I just think it's fantastic that in every single one of your drawings, there's lots of people. And the people are what really going to make the place a great place to be. So I think that's great that you showed that. I was also curious. I had heard that the jurors said that your recommendations were some of the most feasible. And so, what do they mean by that relative to other submissions that they were looking at? Well, what makes your guys' project so feasible relative to others?
I think as a whole, I'm gonna go back to the site plan actually, if that's okay. If it goes a ways away. As a whole, we really emphasize, don't stare at this, you guys are gonna freak out. We emphasize the idea of keeping a lot of the assets there and really trying to look from a kind of equitable perspective on this, because this is a low-income area, and to say that we're pushing everything out and putting in this major development might not be reasonable. So we did numerous things, and these are partially driven by a real estate student because he had some good ideas, but things that would help benefit the existing residential area that wouldn't just kind of create this activity, but we maintained a residence for lower, like they have this kind of halfway house type place on the side already that we were maintaining. And then this trailer park, not trailer park, RV park. It's actually an RV resort, and it's the closest one to downtown New Orleans, and it's actually very popular, and they do well according to the UI people. So maintaining that, and then a lot of our choices and buildings were a little bit smaller scale and not so major as some of them. For example, one of the Harvard schemes, for example, made very extreme infrastructural decisions in regards to the freeway that were probably a little less feasible. Maryland's team, they rerouted all these, which in all reality was a great design and would really be nice for our specific site, but in the overall scheme of things, it probably wasn't the best idea, but they adjusted the grid of all these to make these more straightforward roads. And they got rid of a freeway ramp. Took a freeway ramp off, which is huge, but.
They moved it 500 feet.
Yeah.
So.
Which I think their excuse was the fact that it was just a competition and
Yeah.
for the sake of they wanted to see something out of the ordinary.
I think what was encouraging, though, there's 12 jurors sitting there that they're presenting to, and at least, I don't know, not quite a half are from New Orleans. And so watching their response and their reaction, they're doing exactly what you're doing. They were all nodding, and yes, we could do this. They made several comments to you guys, it's very feasible. And one of the women on the jury, she asked very specific questions about the cost of all the infrastructure. And some of the other teams, it was, they have said it would not be feasible because it's so expensive. So you gotta give them credit to doing that balance, which is really hard. So you just want to do a big gesture, but you did big gestures that were feasible.
Yeah, one thing that I always say to people is, we didn't really have a lot of big ideas, but our big ideas were within the context of what New Orleans has. So we had big ideas for the context of the neighborhood, which was still feasible.
My challenge to them, because they did have people from the city there, and the city's been involved in the whole process, said they're going to take pieces from all these projects and probably try to implement them. I said, go back in 5 years, and then again in 10, and see how much of this has been implemented compared to some of the other schemes. So it's been exciting, it's been exhausting for them, but exciting. All right, do you guys have any questions for any of the speakers today? I think they'll all take a few minutes before we gives you a flavor of what's going on in the school, which I guess my suggestion for next year is we could just start on comments, so that all the students in the building wandering around can sort of get a glimpse of what's happening, because planning needs to be tucked away a little bit. So I think we should do those here. If there's no other questions, I think there's some pizza left. And make sure, please, if you came in a little bit later, that you sign one of these sheets. Okay, and this is our last one for the year, so I hope to see you back here. We'll let our set of presenters next fall.